Hare Krishna, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on Is There Death After Life? A scientific perspective on the concept of death. We'd like to explore this through different ways. Firstly, we'd like to be objective in this presentation. Secondly, we'd like to understand it from the scientific data that's available on the topic. Three, we'd like to understand it or see it from the Vedic perspective and see what they have to say about it. Fourthly, we'd like to see if there's a correlation between science and the Vedic perspective. And fifthly, we'd like to come to some conclusion so that we can be peaceful and understand this moment of death with some knowledge. So death then is not the easiest of things to understand, right? I mean, we celebrate when somebody is born. We are very excited when there's a new human birth. Whenever there's a new child in the family, it becomes very wonderful and glorious. But when there's death, it's that phenomena that is the strangest of them all, because we don't really know what has happened to our loved one. Have they died? Has the body died? Where are they gone to? Are they still present? What's happened to them? And what's going to happen to us? So in order to understand this concept of death then, when does it occur? Well, the thing is, death can come at any moment. And as we can see in some of these clips, death does come at any moment, unexpected, unannounced. So when it does come, how do we prepare ourselves for it? So let's take a look at some of this and see how people have just missed it and are happy to be alive today. So you see this guy crossing the road and oops, he just missed it. Here's a train going by, somebody taking some photos, and oh, just missed it. Here again, that could have been the end. Here's a car driving and a truck comes head on. Oh, just missed it. There's a car coming, reversing completely out of control. Oh, just missed it again. Here's a truck on the road. Oh, just missed it. Just missed it. Luckily, no one is hurt there. Here again, crossing the road, not expecting anything. Oh, just missed it. Here's a fire drill, and they're not expecting there to be live ammunition in the gun. But, woof, the guy's hat fell off. That means there was live ammunition. He's lucky to be alive. Here's a car going out of control. Whoa, just missed it. If it was not for that tree. Here again, just cut the tree, just fell on the spot where you're standing. A child and a mother across the road. Just missed it. Whoa, just missed it. So again and again we see it. Here's a car out of control. Whoa, just missed it. In India, crossing the train line. Wow, just missed it. Here again, car out of control. Oh, here again, crossing the road. Oh, just stopped in time. So here again, driving, and a truck comes head on. Whoa. Walking on the side. Wow, knocked him, but he's happy to be alive. Just missed it. So, having seen these encounters then, are we ready for it? Because you see, it can come at any time. So what is the world's understanding of death and how can we understand it? Let's take a closer look at it from a scientific perspective now.
What happens when we die? Do we simply cease to be? Or do we survive in some form? What is it that makes us unique, conscious beings? is the greatest mystery of existence.
So we can see that a lot of people in history have thought about this question and have tried to answer it, not as easy as we think. But let's see how far our understanding of this can develop.
Problem seemingly too big for science to solve. But today, a cluster of biologists, physicists, and philosophers are closing in on the answer to the ultimate question. Is there life after death?
Is death the end? Eternal silence? Blackness? Nothingness? Or is there a spark inside of us that lives on beyond our physical self?
Well, it's very interesting to see as he described there, is there a spark that lives on? Well, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna described to Arjuna the exact same phenomena. In this verse, Dehinosmin yata dehim komaram yovanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namoyate. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, then similarly the soul passes into another body at death. A wise person is not bewildered by such a change.
Philosophers and scientists have puzzled over that question for thousands of years. It's the great mystery, one that sooner or later we all have to face.
Christians and Muslims believe in a heaven for the just and a hell for sinners. Other religions see death as a transition to an existence on a higher plane or to another life here on earth. All of these beliefs have one thing in common. The body is just a vessel for the soul, and the soul is eternal.
Now in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has explained that very point. The body is just a vessel for the soul. He describes in chapter 2 verse 22, Vasamsi jirani yata vihaya, navani jirani naro parani, tata sharirani vihaya jirani, anyani samyati navani dehi. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old ones before giving up the old and useless ones. So this knowledge has been spoken about before, but why hasn't our modern science kind to accept it? Well, because we can't prove it. At least we think so. It's based on faith. Well, let's see what the new evidence says about it.
This is something many believe in their hearts. But is there a way to prove it or disprove it scientifically?
So, let's hear from the leading people and TV companies of the world that have tried to also have talk shows and discussions on this topic. So let's hear from the leading experts in the scientific world about this concept of death.
Sanjay, in your book, you talk about the idea that what we used to think of as the lines between life and death, this black and white thing, is changing.
Yeah, I mean, we have this sort of conventional wisdom that it's sort of a binary thing. One moment you're here, the next moment you're not. And I think scientifically, we know that's not true.
So scientifically, they're showing, well, it may not just be true that you just live 1 minute and the next minute you're dead. There seems to be some kind of consciousness that still pervades. What is this then? And where does that exist and where is it coming from? Let's see what the scientists have to say about this.
Death is very much a process.
So he's describing death as a process or continuum.
Things happen in the body.
And that we've just heard of just now, where death is a process, where you actually, from the time you were born, your actually body is dying. As the embodied soul continually passes from boyhood to youth to old age. So it's a process, exactly as the scientist has described it here.
Body, things happen at all different levels of the body. The good news is that really at so many points during that process, things can be reversed. You can start to look at that death as a process and turn it in the other direction, which I just found incredibly fascinating.
Deepak, in a recent Pew poll, they discovered that 30% of Catholics now believe in reincarnation, and for the first time...
So here we're hearing a religious tradition that never used to believe in reincarnation, now is believing in reincarnation. 30%, that's a large amount of people. Why?
However, more people, 49%, say they've had a mystical or religious experience, more than say they haven't. What's happening? What do you make of this change?
Well, lots of things are happening. First of all, there's a lot of interesting science now.
So this scientist is saying there's a lot of interesting science now which is trying to explain this. Well, this is very interesting to us too. Let's see if this science can try to help us understand.
That is what spiritual traditions may call reincarnation. Does your model, which is a model that's being talked about, and I think we should mention that your colleague Sir Roger Penrose...
So these two scientists again, this particular scientist, the Western scientist there and the Indian scientist here on the left, this Western scientist is Dr. Hemroff, and he's a colleague of Penrose. Together they created and did many studies in the science of reincarnation and superconsciousness, and they've created theories that try to explain this point. And according to what they have found, according to the theories that they have developed and their findings in research, they actually do believe that there is scientific evidence of reincarnation. So let's hear it in scientific terminology from the scientists themselves to see how they explain this phenomena.
There's also the thesis advisor of Stephen Hawking. So we're talking, about scientists such as yourself and Sir Roger Penrose. Are you saying that your model could possibly lend itself to the survival of consciousness after death, or as proto-consciousness, or as some quantum entangled information in space-time geometry, which could then recycle, which would be basically reincarnation?
Well, I would say that. I should say first that Roger, who's well known on his own right for many, many things, wouldn't necessarily agree with what I'm going to say. He tends to shy away from anything in the spiritual or religious realm. So, but based on our theory, I would say yes.
So he just said yes. This scientist just said yes, that reincarnation is possible. Let's see how he explains it in scientific terms, because he is a scientist after all.
Possible, because, and the context is, for example, in a near-death experience. I'm an anesthesiologist. I work in an operating room. I put people to sleep and wake them up. I've been doing it for 35 years. Now we have occasionally cardiac arrests and patients are revived. And there have been a number of studies that show that at least 17% of these people report that during the resuscitation, when their heart was stopped and there was no blood flowing to the brain, they report this NDE, or near-death experience, with common features. For example, a white light, being in a tunnel, perhaps visiting with deceased relatives, usually a sense of calm, serenity, and then and in some cases floating above their body, looking down on the resuscitation. So when these studies were done, the BBC did a show called The Day I Died, and they asked the doctors who did it, did the study, how can you explain this? And they said, we don't know, ask Penrose and Hemroff, because they have this crazy theory. And so here's what I said for the BBC, and I'll stand by this, although it's been controversial. Normally, even right now, our consciousness is happening in our brains, in the neurons, presumably in the microtubules, but due to changes in fundamental space-time geometry, because it's between our ears also. It's everywhere. It's happening at this
It's between our ears, but it's also part of the continuum of the whole universe, right?
Right. But normally, generally speaking, I think it's mostly constrained between our ears because of the isolation mechanisms that prevent decoherence. Although certainly it can extend with ESP and telepathy and other things. But But when the blood stops flowing and the energy stops being delivered to the tissues, to the neurons, to the microtubules, the quantum information embedded in Planck scale geometry, at this most basic fundamental level in the brain, can kind of leak out or dissipate to the universe at large, but remain as one entity by quantum entanglement. So
Part of the matrix.
Part of the matrix, but staying together as a soul, as that person's consciousness, including their memories, and can exist outside the body in the hologram of the universe, non-local, repeating its scale. And then if the patient is revived, can go back inside the brain, and the patient is revived and says, I had this near-death experience, I was floating above my body. Now, if the patient does not survive, unfortunately dies, then it's possible that this quantum entangled information in the universe, in the matrix, can persist indefinitely and perhaps even go back into a zygote or an embryo, in which case we have reincarnation. So I'm not saying that I can prove that or that definitely exists, but given all the history we have and the lore that suggests it's possible, I would say it's scientifically feasible and plausible for that to occur.
So he just said it's scientifically feasible and plausible for that to occur, and this is a scientist. So the scientific data seems to also lend itself to this concept of reincarnation and life after death. So it gives us hope, doesn't it? Well, you've just heard a whole lot of scientific terminology there from a scientist and somebody who actually has some kind of scientific proof and theories that this phenomena does exist, which is really amazing because it was always taken as belief. Let's see some more scientific research in this field.
Scientists have proof that there is life after death.
What? Is that so? Can you show us?
Well, sort of. What they have discovered is that consciousness may continue even after death. Now,
well, that's still very interesting that something is existing after the body is completely dead. Tell us more.
This is a subject that's been treated with a lot of skepticism over the years, but in a most extensive study of its kind, scientists at the University of Southampton in the UK have spent nearly 4 years examining more than 2,000 people who suffered cardiac arrests at 15 hospitals in the UK, the US, and Austria, and have found that 40% of people who recovered described having some form of awareness at the time when they were declared clinically dead. Now, as I said, Mark, the perception is, or the current wisdom is that death occurs about 20 to 30 seconds after your heart stops beating. And the research indicates that it goes on for significantly longer than that. And this is what
So Krishna has spoken about this in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 17. Avinasi tu tad vidhi yena sarvam idam tatam vinasam avyayasyasya na kachit karam arhati. So he describes that which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. And I think if you hear the scientist, is exactly, or if you hear this report, it's exactly what they seem to have found. That the body is dead, but consciousness seems to go on. And Krishna has spoken about that because consciousness is indestructible.
The sort of top-line takeaway from the report is, quotes, the evidence thus far suggests that in the first few minutes after death, consciousness is not annihilated. Whether it fades away afterwards, we do not know. But right after death, consciousness is not lost. So this is coming, they got this, as I said, you have to kind of take a little bit of a leap of faith here, but it was conducted by prominent scientists in a sensible, studied fashion. It wasn't just, it is anecdotal, but it was done in a conscientious fashion.
Whenever there's a study like this, doubters will jump on and say, well, that's just because you're lack of oxygen and you're hallucinating and all this, and people will kind of poo-poo. But this is putting together a large amount of experiential evidence from people who describe the events as well.
And they describe the events in great detail. So one of the, and we're just going to quote this one particular 57-year-old man who suffered a cardiac arrest and was able to, and he was dead. He was clinically dead. He was on the slab and they were trying to revive him with a defibrillator. And I'll read you his account, what he says. He says the following, it's long, but if you listen to it, it'll make sense. We know the brain can't function when the heart has stopped beating, but in this case, conscious awareness appears to have continued for up to 3 minutes. The man described everything that had happened in the room, but importantly, he heard 2 bleeps from a machine that makes a noise at 3-minute intervals, so he could time how long the experience lasted for. He seemed very credible, and everything that he said had happened to him had actually happened. So he was able to describe in detail what people were trying to do. Now, again, people have described this out-of-body experience. There were certain people who described that, the sort of the Hollywood, bright light at the end of a tunnel, all those kind of things. There were certain people who did that, but for the most part, 40% of these people made specific comments about what was specifically happening in the room for that period of time.
That's very amazing, and there's a scientific study right there. Let's try to look at it a little bit more deeper. Here's a little child. It's a Chinese boy. So the piano is not really one of a Chinese instrument, right? And this boy is just 4 years old. And he's still a little child, right? He's still a baby. But the way he plays this piano makes you wonder, where did he learn how to do this? First of all, the dexterity of his fingers and the way he plays the notes and the keys. And he's only 4 years old. So where does the physical strength is not completely there yet. And he plays his piano like a grandmaster. So where did he learn how to do this? Watch this.
彈多次 first time 就有5000分。俾啲表情啦。34000。收拾心情，收拾心情。好激昂㗎，好激昂㗎，知唔知啊？每一下要撞慢啲成個。
I mean, do you believe what you're seeing here? I mean, it takes years for a grandmaster to perfect this kind of playing, and this boy is just 4 years old. How did he learn to do this? Isn't that amazing? Let's move on.
And the angel sits next to this person's head. And the person sees this. He sees all of it. She sees all of it. No one around can see this, but they're watching.
In order to make sure that our patients are comfortable, we often use an EEG monitor.
So this was a doctor who actually did that very examination. And he connected an EEG monitor to the patient who was terminal and just about to die. And what he found, that at the moment when the person died, there was an interesting thing that happened. Let's try to watch this.
It helps us know what the level of consciousness for our patients. As the patient approaches death, the level of consciousness as measured by these EEG devices goes down to very low levels and then eventually goes to 0.
So of course, when it reaches 0, it means the person is dead.
So at this point, they're no longer breathing.
So at this point, the patient is no longer breathing.
And this is essentially a patient who has now passed away.
And this means a patient has passed away. He's dead.
After they die, the patient's monitor shows a surge in brain activity.
The level of spikes that we see are comparable to a person who's wide awake and talking.
Now, how can you get brain activity when the body is dead? The heart has stopped beating, the lungs have stopped breathing, There's no vital signs in the body. The person is completely dead. There's no, even if there was some synapse going on, it would be the brain is dead, everything is dead. But yet it's showing vital signs in the brain. So what's creating that?
This spike often lasts 2 to 3 minutes. And I want to impress upon you how amazing this is to be sitting at the bedside, looking at a patient who is effectively dead, who has an EEG monitor at the level of someone who's awake, alert, interacting with you.
So the person's vitality is as if they are awake, sitting and interacting with you, and yet the person is dead. So Krishna has spoken about this also. Avinasi tu tad vidiyena sarvamidam tatam. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul. So finally we have first-hand scientific proof of life or vitality or consciousness existing even after the body is completely dead. This completely validates Krishna's words in the Bhagavad Gita that the soul is indestructible, and that which covers the whole body is called consciousness.
Researchers at the University of Southampton conducted the largest ever medical study into near-death and out-of-body experiences, and has discovered that some awareness may continue even after the brain has shut down. Researchers spent 4 years examining more than 2,000 people who suffered cardiac arrest at 15 hospitals in the UK, US, and Austria, and they found that nearly 40% of people who survived described some kind of awareness during the time when they were clinically dead before their hearts were restarted. One man even recalled leaving his body entirely and watching his resuscitation from the corner of the room. Despite being unconscious and dead for 3 minutes, the 57-year-old social worker from Southampton recounted the actions of the nursing staff in detail and described the sound of the machines. Dr. Sam Parnia of the State University of New York, who led the study, says that we know the brain can't function when the heart has stopped beating, but in this case, conscious awareness appears to have continued for up to 3 minutes into the period when the heart wasn't beating, even though the brain typically shuts down within 20 to 30 seconds after the heart has stopped. The man described everything that had happened in the room, but importantly, he heard 2 bleeps from a machine that makes a noise at 3-minute intervals, so we could time how long the experience lasted for. He seems very credible, and everything that he said had happened to him had actually happened.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, here's a scientific proof firsthand. Let's take it a little further.
This was reported a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to talk about it because it's really interesting to me. A mummified monk was found sitting in the lotus position on January 27th in Mongolia. Now here you go, take a look at this monk.
I mean, if you look at this monk, they're describing him as a mummified monk, but their studies found that this person is actually still alive, and it's 200 years old.
What some academics are claiming is that this monk is not dead, but in a very deep meditation. Forensic
So Krishna has spoken about this. So this monk is endeavoring for perfection, and what he's trying to absorb and think himself up before he leaves his body is what he will attain, as Krishna has described here. Therefore, he's going to so much of effort to leave the body in a very detached spiritual way. So Krishna has spoken about this in Bhagavad Gita. Yam yam vapi smaram bhavam tyajanti ante kalevaram tam tam evaiti konteya sada tat bhava bhavita. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits the body, O son of Kunti, that state he shall attain without fail.
Examinations are continuing on the amazing remains, which are believed to be around 200 years old and preserved in animal scan. By forensic examinations,
So you can imagine what an amazing experience that must be.
One who has taken birth is sure to die, and after death, one is sure to take birth again.
So let's try to hear the Vedic perspective on the philosophy of death, as whatever thus far Krishna has said in Bhagavad Gita about the soul, scientists seem to proving now, slowly. So let's hear the Vedic perspective of the science of the soul. and death.
Spoken by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. Now, for some reason, we human beings are unwilling to accept this fact. You may be thinking that while death may come to others, it will somehow or other not come to me. You hear about others dying, but it never comes into your mind that you could be next. The whole situation is like that of a slaughterhouse, where one animal is being slaughtered and another one is busy munching on grass and doesn't realize that it will be his turn next. We call this ignorance. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains to my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. Lord Krishna speaking in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8. Material life is full of calamities. The less intelligent persons try to make a material adjustment to those calamities because they have no information of the supreme abode of the Lord, which is full of bliss and without a trace of calamity.
So Krishna has spoken about this in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 9. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tattvataha tyaktva deha puna janma naiti mameti so Arjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not upon leaving the body take birth again. Then what happens to him? In this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So that's for the devotees. So if you try to hear and learn about Krishna's birth and his activities, then Tyaktva Punajanma Naiti Maamaiti So Arjuna. Then you come back to the spiritual world, back to him. So let's hear from Srila Prabhupada directly on the concept of changing bodies and understanding the body as just a garment in which we live in.
But the tailor, according to the body, made a covering of this hand, and this looks like a hand. This covering of the chest looks like a chest. Therefore, the impersonal means the material covering. Otherwise, spirit soul is personal. So you go to the tailor, according to your body, the tailor will cut a coat. This coat, ingredients of the coat, the cloth, that is impersonal. But it is made like a person, covering of the person. In other words, the spirit soul is person. As much as God is also person. Imperson means the covering. Try to understand. The covering is impersonal, not the living being who is covered. He is not impersonal, he is person. Very simple example. The coat shirt is impersonal, but the man who is putting on coat and he is not impersonal. He is person. So, how God can be impersonal? The material energy is impersonal. That is explained. That is explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Maya tatamidam sarvam jagat abbaktamurti. This jagat is abbakta, impersonal. And that is also energy of Krishna. Therefore he says, I am expanded in the impersonal form. That impersonal feature is Krishna's energy. So the material covering is impersonal, but the spirit soul or the super soul is personal.
So Prabhupada just explained there how, yes, the soul is small, but it has a form, and that form, it's a person. It's in the form of a beej, and it's described as 1/10,000, the upper tip of the hair. So it's a person. That's why the coat that we wear has arms, legs. That shows that the soul which is in the body also has arms, legs, a head, and therefore we are persons. So we're coming to the end of our search in trying to understand about death and understand about life and who we are. Because if we know who we are, then we don't have to fear death. And as we've seen, the body's changing. We've seen consciousness being explained scientifically. And now Prabhupada is explaining how the body just changes. It's the soul that's constant. So let's hear from Prabhupada now firsthand on transmigration of the soul. Before we start there, we'd like to see how the body changes in 1 minute from boyhood to youth to old age. So did you see that? How the body changed from boyhood to youth to old age in 1 minute? So every 7 years we are a new person. So now let's hear from Prabhupada directly on the science of transmigration of the soul.
So, past, present, future, you exist, the body changes. Is it not clear?
So Prabhupada is saying that past, present, future you exist, but your body changes like we saw just now. But you'll remember, right? You remember when you were small, you remember when you were middle age, and you remember when you were old. You remember the experience. Therefore, you cannot be the body because the body seems to have changed each time.
That's clear. Yeah. So therefore, the conclusion that when he'll not have this body, he'll have another body.
So the conclusion Prabhupada is saying that if you're not living in that body which is changing, when that body drops, then you have to be embodied. You have to be in a body. So what body would you take? You'll have to take another body.
You are sitting here. If you don't sit here, you go. That does not mean you are sitting, opportunity is lost. You are sitting here, you sit somewhere. Similarly, the change of body is going on. Therefore, the conclusion is that after you give up this body, you will have another body, as you have already done.
So Prabhupada is explaining, just like we change from boyhood to youth to old age, as we've already done, then at death, it's a final quick change. So Prabhupada commented that when you change from boyhood to youth, do you cry? When you change from youth to old middle age, do you cry? From middle age to old age, do you cry? Because the change is gradual, you don't even know it. You don't even see it unless you look in the mirror. So you don't even know until one day you realize, oh, aches and pains, I'm gone old now. So it's so gradual that you don't realize the body has changed. So death is an immediate change. It's quick. It's immediate. Therefore, you feel that it's a big thing. So it's a gradual change, but when death comes, it's a quick change. Therefore, we feel such a big effect of it. But it's constantly changing.
What is the difficulty to understand?
The seeming difficulty is that while the body is different from that of a boy.
Different body must be different. Therefore, that is called change of body. Unless it is a different body, where is the change?
The memory is there, of the boy, and or the spirit is there.
The memory, sometimes we may not remember. Just like this child, he may not have memory when he was very small, but you have got memory.
So Prabhupada is saying that to say, well, the memory existed, well, we don't always remember, do we? When we under 2 years old, we don't have any recollection of life before 2 years old. From birth to 2 years, we have no memory of it. So to say that we didn't exist at that time, is that correct? Because our mother existed and she can tell us, no, we did this, we did that, we used to cry like this and that. So to say that we didn't exist would be false. We did exist, but we have no memory of it. Therefore, memory can't be taken as a permanent aspect. To say we don't have memory of it doesn't mean we didn't exist. We did exist. So we constantly existing in the body, but the body is constantly changing.
When you was a small child, you are doing something, or he was playing with some cats and dogs, but he does not remember that. But you remember it. So, simply because he has forgotten, does that mean that the incidences were not present?
So simply because you forgot, does it mean it didn't happen? Well, the mother can say, yeah, he did. He did do those things. But we forget it. Now, if we forgot it, does it mean it didn't happen? That's not a very good argument.
So this argument is not very strong because I cannot remember. You do not remember so many things. But the fact is this, that you are changing from this body to this body to this body. Therefore the conclusion should be, that after this body I will accept another body. And that's the fact. As you have accepted in this life from one body to another body, there is a process how to accept it. Similarly, under the same process, you accept another body when this body is no longer useful. Just like at night, you give up this body, you take your subtle body and you go somewhere. You are sleeping in your room, but you are working in a different place. Don't you do that? So, because this body is still useful, therefore you come to back again this body, and in the morning you wake up.
So the proof that we went somewhere and came back, and the proof that the body is still useful is that we get up in the morning. If the body wasn't useful, we wouldn't come back to the body, and we would reject it. But the fact that we get up means the body is still useful.
With this body. So death means when this body is useless, you do not come to this body, you accept another body. This is called death.
So Prabhupada did define death there. The death means that the body is useless. We cannot live in it anymore. Therefore, we don't come back to it. We move on to another body. So that becomes very assuring. That becomes very wonderful. It becomes very pleasing to the heart that when we leave the body, we actually move on to another place under the guidance and care of Krishna. And now we've come to a complete understanding of what is death. Therefore, for a devotee, he doesn't have to fear. Tyaktva puna janma naiti mam eti so Arjuna. Yes, Arjuna, my devotee, he never takes birth again. Why? Because he's taken the time to try to hear and chant and learn about my janma, my birth, and my karma, my activities. And for one who tries to do this, then tyaktva puna janma, he doesn't have to take birth again. What happens to him? Mam eti so Arjuna, he comes back to me in the spiritual world. So I hope this presentation has been educational to help us understand the different forms of evidence from science to the Vedic perspective of the Bhagavad Gita, and then correlating both to have a synergy of both science and spirituality, and now hearing from Prabhupada directly that for one who has taken Krishna's shelter, he is rest assured. He doesn't have to fear. Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam saranam braja aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshasyami masuchaha. That I will take away sarva papebhyo, all the sinful reaction he has. He doesn't have to fear. What happens to him? Mokshasyami masuchaha. He comes, he attains the spiritual world. Masuchaha, do not fear, he tells Arjuna. So for a devotee, he doesn't fear death. He simply goes on chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and doing devotional service to Krishna. In this way, he perfects his life, and at the end of his life, he goes back to the spiritual world. So thank you very much. I hope this presentation has been educational. Please chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Hare Krishna.